All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Young Han. Young, welcome. So awesome to have you today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Same, and I gotta tell you, I know you and I were talking before we hit the record button, but you run a podcast too, I'll start by giving a shout out to the folks over at the Podcast Guest platform because those guys are doing some amazing work, and without them doing what they were doing, I doubt, huh, that you and I would be talking today, and that's how I connected with you, and that's what got us together. And so I'm really grateful for them. I was checking out your podcast. And of course, being a father of seven myself, man, I really resonated with a few of the episodes that you have put out there. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And if you are a dad who's an entrepreneur listening in on this, we'll make sure you get the info for Young's podcast because you'll probably want to go check that out too and stuff. And so, Young, what I'd like to do is just kind of start off by turning it over to you so that you can share a little bit and we can kind of set some context, let the listeners know who you are and what you're all about, but kind of just start off by sharing about, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you do, and also give us some background of how you even got here and how you got into doing what you do.
Yeah, that's a really great question because I'm actually trying to figure out the answer to that as we speak
I'm right
myself.
along with you, man.
I still am on the journey of figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. But as it relates to now, the best way I can answer it is that I'm a business builder. I like to build businesses and I like to help people build theirs. And I like doing it through systems building. I'm an operator through and through, and I like operationalizing everything, not just business, but everything in life as much as I possibly can. And even my podcast, The Girl Dad Show, is actually very operational if you think about it. The concept was really around just like wanting to figure out how to be a better dad and also be a better business person at the same time. And the thesis was I could ask people what they
Yeah.
thought and then learn from them. And so the whole concept was around sorry.
It's all right.
the whole
That's
co-
totally cool.
Sorry, my kid just popped in to ask me a question.
That's totally
um
cool.
the concept around it is that I like to, yeah, help people build businesses. And so I started off this career 3 years ago. I kind of had a midlife crisis. I turned 40 and I had young daughters and I just was doing a good job. I was a executive, operations executive at a established tech company and doing a good job and making good money. And just came to the epiphany that, like I wanted more time value out of my life and realizing that, I was doing a good job of living the middle American dream of establishing myself and then, saving for retirement and then, retiring and when I'm 65 and then praying to God that I die by 90 because there's no more money left. And then I don't know, I just had a moment where I just couldn't deal with it. I couldn't subscribe to it and I just had to get out of it. And so I moved my family from San Francisco to Austin, Texas to lower my cost of living and
Okay.
start making bigger bets. And so I started betting on myself. And I started betting on myself by first being a fractional operator and helping early stage tech companies scale with what I knew how to do best. That was the hard skill that I had earned and known. So I used that to sell. I did really well, and I made a good amount of money over the last 3 years. And I've just been deploying that capital, building a bunch of other small businesses. And so now I'm the owner and operator of about 8 businesses.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So when you ask me what I do for a living right now at this point, the best way I explain it to people is that in 3 years, I've pretty much transformed my entire life. And it has a lot to do with this person that I'm going to share with you today. This person kind of directed me in a completely different way, in a non-linear way of thinking. And I'm now headed towards building financial freedom versus trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. I'll have all of the time and luxury to do that in about 2 years. Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I started my very first business in 1996 uh, after working 7 years as a commercial fisherman in Alaska, on Alaska's Bering Sea. So I
Oh,
could save up
wow.
money to start that business.
Wow.
And I started a cleaning and restoration company because I knew this guy in Seattle, and that's where I live. I'm in the Seattle area, who was in that business, and he was doing all right. And I thought, well, gosh, if he could do it, so can I. That was
That's
my.
right.
I mean, I would like to say it was some noble cause. No way. I just thought I can make money doing this.
That's
And
right.
first year, I blew through over $300,000, and I still didn't have a clue what the heck I was doing. And so people who think, well, if I just had more money, then I could solve it. No, not necessarily true at all.
Absolutely, yeah. I actually just wrote I have a weekly newsletter that I just started 2 months ago that shares all my business practices. But the one that came out 2 weeks ago was how I made a $200,000 bet and I lost, right? Because the reality is money is just one piece of it. It's a
Yeah,
vehicle, it's a medium, it's a tool. It's not actually the solution. You need skills, you need hard skills, and you also need knowledge, and you also need people.
yeah,
And so there's a lot of things that come together to make this all work, and money is just another one of those assets or tools. So
totally,
you're absolutely
totally.
you're absolutely accurate. But I do think that seeing someone be successful is also a really good um, point, and I love that because for me, the the thing that's really helped me the most in kind of switching my mindset from a W-2 employee to now kind of a business builder has been this concept of like hanging out with people and associating with people and just surrounding myself with people that are doing things that I want to do or want to be like, because it makes it more approachable. And so,
Absolutely.
sure, I may fail. I may do that like you did, the $300,000 bet where you wasted a year and didn't learn because you were surrounding yourself with this person that did this. And obviously, you could do it if they could do it.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think that that's the reality, right? It's like you start seeing people doing the stuff that you think that's not possible. It becomes more approachable, and it's super important and valuable to find those people
yeah.
because they
Totally.
will they will help you. They will help you just by being around you. They'll help you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, okay. So now that we've got some context set here, I'm gonna switch gears.
Sure.
I'm gonna reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So, Young, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Yeah, I have one person that kind of rises above the rest, right? I've
Okay.
been, very, very aggressive in finding people to be in my network and be in my social sphere because I'm realizing that my mom was always right. I never listened to her until I was 40 years old, but she was absolutely right from the very beginning. You got to choose your friends wisely. And
Yeah.
it has a lot to do with the fact that like you end up becoming who you hang out with. And it's so true. Sorry, mom, for not listening to you. I'm listening to you now. And it's very, very important. And so, out of all those people that I have now chosen to surround myself with in this stage of my life, in this chapter, there is one that has completely redirected everything. And that's Eric Liu. It's a gentleman named Eric Liu. He lives in Chicago, and very, very clever man, and very instrumental and influential into kind of this non-linear way of thinking for myself. I think
Okay.
I was always in a mindset of like, okay, I got to make 10% more this year. I got to make 15% more this year. I got to save 7% on COGS. I got to, this kind of like strategic goal planning that we're ingrained in as a W-2, right? Like how we think about things in business or life is just all this kind of linear thinking. And Eric did one major thing for me, which was, well, why don't you just change yourself? And what do you need to do to make $1 million a year personally versus trying to like get there in 20 years? What do you have to do next year to make $1 million? And I was like, I can do that. He's like, you can do whatever the hell you want. And it was fascinating because as I got to know him more, I got to hang out with him. I started to realize the way that he thinks about, the world was so obvious. It was so
Mhm.
obvious. But
Mhm.
the fact that he lived it and he did it made it real for me to
Yes.
watch someone doing it was really, really important for me to see that not only is it just like someone that's saying something, it's not something on Instagram or social media, these business gurus that are like, go da da da, make tons of money and all these kind of like things that are online. But this guy's a real person in front of me that's been doing this for 15 years, and he's hardly on social media, and he's literally been living this lifestyle for so long. And being able to watch him physically do it made it very approachable. And then I've said this to his face, so I don't feel bad saying it, but I was golfing with him one time, and I just looked over at him. This is like in the beginning of our relationship. I just looked over and I was so angry. I just said, "Do you know what makes me so angry about you?" And he goes, "What?" And I'm like, "You're dumber than me." And we both had a really good laugh because he was like, "I agree. I think you're way smarter than me. I think your mindset is all wrong. And that's the only issue." And so it was a really, really fun moment for me to realize that, as sharp as your skills are, some of the stuff isn't just based on how smart you are. Some of it's
Yeah.
who you know. Some of
Totally.
it's what hard skills you have. Some of it's how much money you have. Some of it's a lot of these different variables that have to mix in and how do you utilize the tools that you have. And so it's been an incredible journey for me, meeting this guy and baking him into my life and
Yeah.
restructuring the way I think about the world and life.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned something else in there, mindset. I mean, mindset is a really big piece of all this too, because what you shared about Eric, I would imagine, becoming friends with him and being able to see him and like you look at him and like, okay, he's doing the stuff that he
Yeah.
teaches me. And so, it gives you that confidence. And then there's the other piece too, I gotta imagine, at least this has been my experience, is there can be all kinds of people doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, like for example, you and I, we both host podcasts.
Yeah.
And we both got enough episodes under our belt that anybody would
Mhm.
look at like, well, these guys aren't a fly by night thing. They're consistent with their podcast and they've been doing it for a while,
Yeah.
And so it's pretty easy for anybody to look at that and go, okay, these guys, Kevin and Young, this is something that they value and that they're investing in. And so, they could look at us and say, if I wanted to know how to run a podcast, these would be two guys to talk with. I mean, that would be pretty obvious just by looking at what we've already
Yeah.
got out there and stuff.
It'd be good deduction. Yeah.
But by the same token, I have had, as you have, an amazing experience hosting this podcast.
Yeah.
And as an amazing of an experience that I have had, I am always really cautious when the last thing I would do would be to say something, well, because I've done this, then anybody can do this, and this would be good for anybody to do. Because that's not necessarily true at all.
Totally. I completely agree with you. And there's no question there, but I'd love to comment on it just because I don't think Eric ever taught me anything. He just existed and asked me questions. And by de facto around him questioning me, I started to think about things differently.
Mm-hmm.
So he would
Mm-hmm.
never say that he was my mentor. He actually gets sheepish when I tell him that he's been one of the most influential people in my life. He actually kind of just ignores it and kind of moves on because he wants to talk about like, whatever is next on his mind, right? Like what other business he's working on. But the reality for me is that you're absolutely right. Like what works for you doesn't always work for everybody else. And you got to be very, very conscious of who you take this advice from, and you got to figure out what you want from it. And then as it relates to the podcasting thing, just to be very, very granular here, I don't recommend anybody do it. Actually, it's a lot more work than I realized. And it's a tremendous amount of energy and resources that it goes to running a show and on a consistent basis. And the ROI has to make sense for you.
Yep.
It has to make sense for you. And I'm not just talking about money, right? I'm talking about like all the things that go into allocating your time into
Yep.
something like this because it's very time consuming.
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My buddy Tony Grummeyer, I know we were talking last week, and he was kind of giving me some insight. And for one, he asked, he's like, Kevin, is it all right if I share some insight with you? So he gets permission first.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a good thing to do. But then he said, okay, he said, now what I'm going to tell you, he said, I am not even going to tell you what you should do. But Kev, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share with you a couple of things that are working really well for me, and you just take from it whatever you will, you know. And there is such power in that,
Yeah.
and you know, because you know, just being like I'm sure Eric was just. So I'm curious, when did you and Eric first meet? How long ago has it been now?
3 years ago. So
3
less
years.
than 3 years ago. 2 years and 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I can just
Completely changed the direction of my life. I was just going to be a consultant, trying to like learn how to make money as a fractional COO to tech
okay.
companies. And I was going to try to, make this my lifestyle. And so I could control my life better, have more time for my kids, just do the stuff that I'm good at, make good money doing it. And that was the goal. That was the ambition. Very linear, very logical. It was still very risky for me. And coming from a W-2 mindset, it's a lot of risk, right? Like, oh, I'm
Totally.
starting off on my
Totally.
own, having to do my own biz dev, and then the response that I got from most people was, wow, that's really adventurous. Go for it. I wish you luck, all those things. And Eric's like, what do you want, a cookie? Like, that's like, what I'm like, I don't know. What do you mean? That's impressive. Isn't that cool? And he's like, no, it's not cool. Like, I don't know what you want me to say. Like, let's talk about something that's actually like cool or interesting. And I'm like, oh, that's so fascinating. What do you mean? And he started telling me about the businesses that he was building and how he automated them, or he built out a professional team for it, and then how he's expecting it to decrease in efficacy after 7 years. I mean, just the way that he's thinking about businesses at scale was just so different. And I was just like, oh man, I gotta like, I want that. I want that freedom to be able to just like be able to explore a new business when I want to, and like have the not only the time but also the money to go do it, right? And just like being able to free myself to explore my personal passions, but also spend time with my family and just have that level of freedom. And so I became obsessed with it, and singularly obsessed with it, and asked him to be my best friend. And he obviously thought that was super weird and awkward, but he eventually said yes, and we've been talking ever since. And he just was over here 2 weeks ago. He stayed at my house 2 weeks ago for Christmas break. After Christmas, he just came by on 27th to the 30th and just stayed with me, and we just like talked and hung out. But really good guy, yeah, and really changed the direction of where I'm headed. But back to the main point that we were talking about here. I think that for me, because the primary way that I make money is still fractional COO work, but I also
Okay.
started doing business coaching. So I now not only do I build small businesses, I also help small business owners generate revenue. I have a fairly good operating system that helps small business owners scale very quickly. It's
Okay.
really useful to getting to your first $1 million in annual revenue. It's a system that helps you do that first kind of hunch and crunch.
Okay.
But the number one thing I always ask every business owner is, what are your personal goals? Because going back to what you just talked about, none of it matters if your personal goals don't match with what your business goals are.
Totally.
So,
Totally.
like, I look at my little brother and I look at my best friend, and neither one of them want to start a business. Neither one of them want to climb the corporate ladder. They're happy making a nice fat salary at a big tech company and mid-level management, and they decline promotion offers 15 years straight now. They decline it, and they're like, why would I mean, I'm going to make what, 30 or $40,000 more a year and have to work 15, 20 more hours a week. It's terrible. I could do my job in 28 hours a week. I get paid well, and I have other hobbies that I'm interested in. And
There you go.
they have a really good perspective on what makes them personally
Yep.
happy. And
Yep.
I admire that, and I'm attracted to people that are happy. And so it doesn't always have to be monetary success or business success. Like, I think
Totally.
that it's really important for people to understand what makes them personally happy, and then build the business around that, or their lifestyle around that.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting because if I go back to that first business, I people on the outside looking in would say, "Oh, Kevin's running a successful business because I had team and this and that, and we were growing that business, and it was profitable." But I distinctly remember being in the office on a Sunday, and
Mhm.
I just completely lost it because I'm like, "What in the heck am I doing? Because this is not what I wanted for myself, was to be here on yet another Sunday in this
Yeah.
office when I should be spending time with my family.
Hmm.
And quite honestly, young, prior to that day, I had never really defined what success was for me.
Hmm.
I just looked at that business as I believe I can make good money doing this,
Hmm.
and I could provide well for my family by doing that.
Yeah,
But at what expense? And
that's
at
right.
that point, it was the expense of not having time with them. And through that process, I realized, okay, now for the first time, I really started looking at, well, what do you want? And now I've been that way, and that would have been all the way back. Oh my gosh, that would have been back in 2002, 2003.
Mm.
And now I am very intentional
Hmm.
about how my business fits in with my life,
Yeah,
because it has to be that way. Because, well, for one, the people that I serve get me at my best when my business is fitting in with my life, when my business is in alignment with who I am and the way that I want to.
yeah,
When I get to show up that way, everybody wins, you know.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's a huge thing.
It's hard to navigate that. And I think that you're very blessed to be able to figure that out for yourself. It's one of those things that I think that is so hard to achieve, and you're a rarity because you figured out the hard skills that you can use to make money and also provide value, so you can work that into your life, and still make good money and live the life that you want. But the vast majority of people can't do that because there's a hierarchy of needs, right? They're just trying to feed
Yeah,
and create revenue.
yeah, yeah,
Excuse
yeah,
me. And I think the trick is like, how do you focus all of your energy and attention into optimizing for revenue so that you can optimize then for COGS, and then you can optimize for income. And then once you have that, then it's a matter of like optimizing for systems, right? And so building the system so that it's not reliant on you to do that. So that way you do have the ability to do what you have, which is, I think, is like the pinnacle of success, right? Like you basically you are successful in my mind because it sounds like you figured out what you love to do, what you want out of it, and you can get paid for it. And so it's a great place to be.
yeah. Well, I am not gonna lie. It took a while to do that, and I mean, and it's a continual process, really. It's a
Absolutely.
continual process of just self growth,
Yeah,
and I have gone through some incredible and immense self growth just to get to where we're at right here, right now, and that will continue. That will continue. So I'm
absolutely.
curious, if you look back
Hmm.
at this relationship between you and Eric, and
Hmm.
I'm sure you could come up with a number of examples of
Sure.
this. I just want to challenge you, come up with one. No, it'll be something that just pop right to the top of your mind. If you look at this relationship between you and Eric that you guys have had over the last 3 years or so, what is an example of where you got to make a really substantial impact, and hands down, that would have never happened if not for your relationship with Eric?
I would never have thought to scale this business or my
Okay.
business entities. So
Okay.
my original goal was to optimize for time. So
Okay.
my original
Okay.
goal was, okay, I don't want to do the W-2 grind. I want to figure out ways to make more money in less time. And so
Okay.
now I was on the optimization of time, right? So that becomes with developing hard skills that are very specifically needed for a niche group that you can then charge more amounts for so that you could work less, spend more time with your family, and then figure out a consistent way to generate that money. So that was my original thesis and epitome of what success looked like for me.
Okay.
And then meeting Eric, I started to realize that you could systematize a business. And it doesn't have to be a business, doesn't have to be these gigantic things. It could be 1 million to $10 million in annual revenue, and you could just systematize it and cash flow 500,000 a year. Like you could systematize it and cash flow a couple $1 million a year. Like there are these really interesting concepts for me that you could just like systematize a business. And obviously I knew that in the back of my mind, but I always just like coming from venture backed companies in San Francisco, I was always just used to like, oh no, you can't just stay still. You have to keep growing it. And I don't know why it never registered, but it completely changed the way I thought about business. And so now I started going down the road of finding my businesses, my core businesses that could cash flow. I could systematize and cash flow.
Mhm.
And I would not be doing what I'm doing right now if I didn't have that conversation with Eric.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
nudged me into this direction of like, no, 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 you don't like systematize everything, like professionalize all of it. Don't even worry about like, so the whole concept of like, oh, I need to like optimize for time so I can spend more time with my family. His concept is his rebuttal to that would have been, well, if time for your family is the most important thing, then systematize all of it and spend all your
Mhm.
time with your family.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I just never thought about that. And
Sure.
it just never
Sure.
was possible for me. I always felt like I had to work to earn. And I'm working way more than I ever did and I was originally doing. So in some ways, I'm actually doing the opposite of what I'm trying to strive for. But the goal is that I have a 5-year plan, and if I can make enough bets in this 5 years, then I can have 30 or 40% failure rate and still end up at a place where I'm very comfortable.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we'll have the flexibility of time to spend with my family, but also spend time on projects that I'm interested in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you are in this really awesome spot in that you've got this relationship with someone like Eric, who that you just totally resonate with him,
Hmm.
and he resonates with you, and he is kind of this guiding point, if you will, this lighthouse, if you will, that
Yeah.
just kind of is there for you as you continue moving forward and stuff. And
Yeah.
powerful. That's powerful.
It is very powerful. He's already evolved though, so it's kind of annoying because he's now like trying to like double down on one single business versus having a diversified portfolio of assets. He's
Okay.
now like, oh, if I have the skill to, do this for 3 or 4 businesses, why wouldn't I just like double down and make one $100 million company or like, and so he's kind of playing around with this like moonshot thing. I think he's kind of bored, to be honest with you, but I think that's something that I'm like starting to learn from is that like if you optimize too much for time, where does your time get spent, right? And
Sure.
so you
Sure.
could get bored, right? I know it sounds really crazy because everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, I'd love to retire early," but what do you do with your time? And how do you stay fulfilled and how do you stay, passionate about something? And so I think he's really big on like, right now it's like doubling down on a business and scaling it larger. And then secondly, he's really focused on like, the next level of needs, which is I think community. And so he's really big into this concept of buying a big plot of land and building like 20 or 30 homes on it and then having all of his like core friends live together in a
Okay.
compound style
Okay.
living space.
Yep.
And kind of going back to the whole concept of like when he's like old and retired and what does he want out of life? He wants to work on really cool things with people that he likes and respects.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's really what's important. I think it's just like this level of evolution, when you get to like have this that like, oh, money goes away, that's not a problem, awesome, food isn't a problem, customers isn't a problem, like all these things become knocked off. What do you look for, right? What do you aspire for? And I think that that's probably where he's at. I'm assuming because right now I'm still trying to figure out how to get customers and still trying to figure out how to lower my opex and cogs, right, and trying to like increase my margins. And so I don't know if I'm mentally at that level yet, but it is fun to have that marker that's so
Sure.
close to proximity for me so I can kind of watch what he's thinking and doing as I try to catch up to him.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. It's so, what's the right word I'm looking for? And it's so valuable to
Mhm.
have these people in our lives that have, just as an example, run businesses bigger than our own, done
Mhm.
things bigger than what we've done, so that we can learn from them, and we
Right.
I used to, and this was one of the big things that I had to deal with, was
Mhm.
if I would look at a really success or somebody that I perceive as being really successful, I
Mhm.
would put that entrepreneur on a pedestal. I'd be like, well, they're way up here because they've achieved all of this, and here's me down here somewhere.
Mhm.
And when I was that way, it really limited my capabilities. And
Mhm.
and what I've come to figure out over the years in having so many conversations, whether it's one on one or in group settings or what have you, with lots of successful entrepreneurs, I've come to realize that yeah, you know what, they might be world class at whatever it is they do, but even at that, they're dealing with very real problems on a daily basis. They've got stuff
Absolutely.
that they're dealing with too, and
Absolutely.
we're all doing the best we can with what we got,
Yeah,
and
agreed. If I can just add 2 points to that, I completely agree with you. There is a sacrifice that you have to make to be that successful. And so
totally.
by sheer nature of like time as a a scarce commodity, you are now depositing less time into something else.
Yeah,
So as much success as you have somewhere, you'll have incremental, if not equal amount of failures in other areas.
totally.
And so it's really hard for me to idolize or pedestal anybody because I just know that's a decision that they made with their time
Mhm.
and their time allocation. And so I don't see it as a pedestal or an idolization. I see it more as like, oh, that's an interesting allocation of time and resources.
Yeah,
Very cool. So if they made those decisions, these things turned out this way, and that's the pros and cons of that. And how would I assess that? And so that's how I think about it. And then the second thing is like I don't idolize Eric in that way either. And if I'm sure Eric will listen to this, but I always think of him as my equal and as my friend because what we're really doing is an exchange of value.
yes,
So I
yeah,
learned this from my first business partner. She was older than me and she was more experienced and she had money. And she said this to me. I was like, "Why did you choose me as a business partner?" And she said, "I have money and experience. I don't have youth and energy. And I need your energy. Like I can't go run around like you do right now to build this thing up, but I can tell you what to do." And so we're exchanging value. Like I don't have the physical capabilities of like doing. We started a restaurant, so it was very labor intensive. I don't have the physical ability to run 20 hours a day for 6 days a week, where you do. And so we're exchanging that value, and you're going to get a master class in business. And it always stuck with me when she said that because it's always like there's always an exchange in value, even if someone is providing more than you think than you deserve, right? Because the reality is that person that is providing the money or the success or the lessons is also gaining something from you, whether that's in time or articulation of that concept or theory or whatever it may be. There's an exchange in value happening, and
yeah,
you just don't know what value you're providing for people. And so I've never lost that train of thought, and I always look at everything as like time and place. So as long as I do a good job of learning that skill, I'll eventually be able to provide the value back to Eric as well too. And so in my mind, even though I'm sure there's an exchange in value that he's getting immediately, I also look at it as him getting me to the point where he can have a good banter with me. So now he's built his own mastermind friend, right? And so I see it that way as well too, where he has a baked interest into getting me to level up so that we can
you
have that
bet. Yeah,
cogent conversation, right? So
absolutely,
there's like kind of a
absolutely.
three ways of thinking about that differently. So hopefully that
Yeah,
adds some context to your point and
for
how I agree
sure,
with it.
for
Hmm.
sure. Well, Young, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today. And for anybody listening to this, going, man, Kevin, I really like Young. I like what the way he shows up. I like what he stands for. I like some of the stuff he shared. How can they find out more about what you guys are doing, what you're doing?
Yeah, so the fastest way to get access and figure out how to work together or work with me is alwayshan.com. So
Okay.
always plural, Han is my last name, H-A-N. So A-W oh no, sorry, I'm spelling it ALWAYSHAN.com. Always Han. So my last name is Han, and it's a kind of a pun because I'm always on. And it's just my concept of like life integration. After 2.5 years of podcasting about how business people operate businesses while they parent, I'm realizing that you know for me, work-life balance is not binary. It's more about work-life integration. And if I need to go to a recital at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to go to a recital at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But if I need to be on a business trip at Saturday morning to, another city or country, I'm going to be on a flight, and I'm just going to integrate my life all together and do what's right for the moment and for my businesses and family during that time frame, and make those assessments as I go. And so alwayshan.com is the best way to reach
Okay.
me, and you can see all the ways that you can work with me from there, whether that's podcasting or my fractional CXO services, or if it's business coaching, you're a small business owner and you need business coaching. All of those things link out from that main hub.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, once again, Young, I want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. What my goal from this is always that the listeners to get to hear from our guests, and these conversations just inspire them to place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own life. And thanks to you, we definitely delivered on that today. So thanks so
Oh,
much.
awesome. Mhm.
Any last thing you feel led to share before we call it a wrap?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind me sharing, just my one piece of advice that I can give anybody out there building a business, just take the time to do the deep work to figure out what makes you happy and what you want. I know it sounds really strange and scary to think about like a business building, but you're going to figure out how to build a business. It's a very linear mechanical process. You can't figure out what makes you happy. So that you have to do the deep work and figure it out, and then build the business that supports that.
Yeah,
Because if you start building the business without that in mind, you can accidentally end up with a very fancy job.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, this has been really great, Young, and I am excited to get this out there and share it with a lot of other entrepreneurs. And once again, thanks so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet.